log in first, right? Hi! I'm Natalya. That was a great intro. I'm afraid to report that all of my talks since then have been downhill, gotten more opinionated about things. But just to give an introduction, my name is Natalya. I'm a software engineer at the New York Times. I also am an instructor at the Harvard Extension School. And really what that means is that I'm the person who gets brought in to fix the CSS and/or, quote, a real comment I read in some code one time, make these styles reusable somehow. I was like, I got good news for you. So basically, I'm someone who gets brought in to bridge this infamous gap between design and development, as I have been a designer and a developer. But I'm not really here to talk to you about that gap, really, because I'm coming to you from another perspective. I am a career switcher into tech, and before I ever, picked back software, I was like, I'd had a live journal when I was, a teenager. I did HTML and CSS then, or inline styles, really. I'm a career switcher into tech, and I look at everything through a different lens because I'm an educator. And I realize that when I'm really brought in to fix the CSS, what I'm really brought in to do is fix the gaps in communication between people, set up systems for communicating across different disciplines. And, when I started writing this talk, I was like, imperative, declarative, but Laura covered it. That is not what this talk is about. I want to talk about a much larger pattern, and that is the intersections between mental models, in technology specifically, and how your entire career trajectory can be shaped by how you respond. Now, you're all here at a conference, which means you all care about your career trajectories. You've all had ice cream, so you're pretty ready to hear what I'm going to say, and at first it's going to be a little grim. So, CSS is absolutely at an intersection of mental models. How do we know? Well, because we keep having the same debates, like, is it programming? Yes and no. Should designers or engineers own it? Like, it's code, but it's programming design. People are fighting over it. And you really get some heated debate about, it is stupid and counterintuitive, and versus no, it works exactly how I would imagine it would work. It's awesome. And you get these really big opposites happening. But CSS is amazing. We're all here, so we agree. Thank you for agreeing with me. Because it handles that complexity when two disciplines overlap and have to communicate with each other. Managing complexity is what makes CSS so great, and it does it while being so, quote, simple. So why the debate though? Why is it still, why didn't we just it manages the complexity, everything's great, moving on. But look at those mugs you can buy. You search this and those are side by side. CSS is awesome and CSS kind of sucks and they cost the same, which, but again though, if you pay attention to the numbers of results though, I think decidedly CSS is awesome. And yet it keeps happening. People keep saying, no, it's, not a programming language, and it keeps being devalued, or people arguing about it, and just keep on creating on this debate, raging on about stuff, and just don't go on Twitter. Quit making these arguments happen. I'm just kidding, Laura's over there. But why do these keep happening? Why are people doing this? Well, to an educator, that is some of the most predictable behavior. Humans are super predictable, and tech, it is so predictable. And let me tell you what's happening. So there's this thing. Yeah, I got a hard copy for my notes. I don't trust technology. I didn't study computers in school. In addition to being an art major, I studied psychology. And then my graduate school was all about learning, creativity, talent development, and it was basically how to teach creativity in any discipline, which when I enrolled, I was like, yeah, right, I'm creative because I just am. And then I learned wow, you can teach creativity just like you can teach critical thinking. You can teach people to have above average learning, to learn faster and more efficiently, and to the many interventions that you can have when learning veers off course. So I was just I am equipped with this knowledge. I have this lens to look through. When I switched careers into tech, I was like, oh my gosh, what is happening here? Oh my goodness. To understand why we're arguing about CSS the way we do, and we're CSS is valuable, and we're trying to prove its value, or people are trying to disprove its value, it's let's take a look at how people learn instead. Humans, right? We don't acquire knowledge line by line. You don't just sit down at a textbook and like scan it through and like, I have acquired this information like a robot. Like, you have to take in information, organize it into patterns of thought, and like in your brain, which is what I mean when I say mental models, like of how stuff works, right? And that's essentially like what we're doing. It's like every time we learn something, we like assimilate information, accommodate, like maybe reject something. We create this like cloud of like, this is kind of how stuff works. Great, I learned something. Well, that's why prior knowledge is key, right? You have to have new information meet your prior information in your brain. Like, it doesn't just like happen in a vacuum. It's like you learn one thing and the next thing you learn has to meet that thing that's already in your brain. So what you learn first really matters. That's why you see people are like, I learned Haskell first, and JavaScript is chaos. I prefer my mathy rigid language, you know? And people who are like, I love JavaScript, and Haskell is just this opinionated, rigid mess, and JavaScript allows me the creativity and flexibility to do things the way, you know, I should be able to do them. That's why designers learning CSS are like declarative, thinking in layers, yes. Whereas a programmer who started out with like, you know, general programming principles sees CSS and is like, whoa, way too global. Let's like put lines between things, scope it, and like control it because like I can't step through it. There's no control. It feels icky. But you know, we learned this earlier today. I'm engaging some of your prior knowledge right now. Anybody catch that great Q&A where Rachel was like, prior knowledge can interfere with new information. I have also taught CSS Grid to complete beginners just starting out, and they get it way faster than somebody who has had to twist their brain into knots to understand, like, okay, so technically I'm floating something, but it's really percentages, and I have to like, I have to yell at the browser to just not break stuff. It can absolutely interfere with the information that you've already acquired. So let's like unpack that. Like, what does that mean? Like, oh, great, don't learn anything, or you might not learn it so well. What I mean is that the good feeling that happens when you finally have that moment when something clicks, like it just like, oh, I get it. This is how this thing works. Odds are it'll be the first thing you really learn. It's that feeling like, I did it, I want to accomplish something, and I get a predictable behavior, and it keeps working that way, and you're just like, I am awesome. You tweet about it, like I'm great, I feel good. And then you like hear about this thing and you try it too. Like, I'm gonna give this a shot. And then it just does the exact like opposite of what you'd expect. And that like jarring feeling of like, why would someone make something so frustrating and stupid and I hate it and I'm gonna tweet about it? That's a bad feeling. And that feeling is essentially like cognitive dissonance. It's like that like, I believe this, but I'm also supposed to believe this, two opposing ideas at the same time, and your brain feels icky. That's a really great feeling for when you want to learn, but it's also like it's a feature and a bug. It's a lot like what we were hearing is like the place where people quit, where they realize like the difference between what is possible and what they're able to do. It's that gross friction of this doesn't work right. I want to reject it. And so for like an educator, it's like, oh, cool, I am not judging. That feeling is one we all feel. Like, raise your hand if you have been frustrated by something in technology when you're like, this doesn't work the way I expected it to. Yeah, right? Like, but you know to push through. Or you have a mentor who says, hey, check out these resources that'll kind of scaffold this for you or help you think about it. It's called the zone of proximal development. It's like what you can do by yourself. And there's this like little zone of like, here's how much more you can do if somebody helps you a little bit, nudges you in the right direction. Which I'm like, teaching. Yeah, like a good mentor, a senior engineer, somebody who can help you walk through, like pull you through that cognitive dissonance where it feels bad so that you can emerge on the other side as like, I get it. I have another moment where it clicks and it feels good, and now I have two mental models of how things work. That's great. Cool, but what happens if you tweet about it and you get super reinforced loudly to reject a mental model? Over and over, you get told, it is broken, it is stupid, I hate this framework, I hate this approach. I hate this language. The amount of damage this is really causing, it's like the controlled environment in a classroom, right? Where you take these risks and learn something new. Destroyed by, I'm not going to say Twitter, but I'm going to say Twitter. Destroyed by the loud platforms that we have at our fingertips, that we have created, that limit both the potential of the person trying to learn something new, to stay in their comfort zone, reject a different way of understanding something, and be like, nah, I've got the good feeling, I'm going to stay here, and I'm not going to venture outside of that. But it also greatly harms the new beginners in tech. How many people starting out in the industry now don't learn CSS because it's not real programming and it's not going to get them a job? I've been called unhireable because I highlight CSS too much on my resume by people who are responsible for getting people hired, recruiters. It's dangerous stuff to amplify these negative reactions, and unfortunately, it happens all the time, right? That's why we have people be siloed so much, why people cannot fathom, like why Lara had those slides of like, there's HTML, CSS, and then all the way here is real computer science, and there's different value added, like we put so much pressure on people to silo themselves, to isolate themselves. We create arbitrary barriers. And maybe that's why we have a gap between design and development, is because like we make one ourselves. And it's a really sad thing to think about. But the good news is, because these barriers are completely arbitrary and self-imposed, like even the separation of technology and art or design is like a pretty new phenomenon. Like there's no reason that we can't overcome them. And so that's why I'd really like to share a story from one of my classrooms. Like I said, I can't stop talking about how I used to teach. I have an assignment in my safe, controlled environment of a classroom, and I'm like, please don't tweet your experiences, where after I get to know my students, and the class it's modular design patterns with React, which I always say it's like a bait and switch. I'm like, here's React, and it's like HTML and CSS for weeks before we get started writing a single bit of React code. I get to know my students, and they're a multidisciplinary body. We got like graphic designers, seasoned backend developers, everybody in between, and we had like an SEO expert taking it, and I was like, good luck, we're gonna do this. And once I get to know their skills, and I assign them with this like thing, it's called like, you're gonna make a prototype, and I create this scenario like, you had your CEO and marketing lead whiteboard something and said, prototype this, we're going to lunch. And then I have very specific team like roles. You are the designer, you are the front-end developer, et cetera. Very much just like you would find in a startup. And that's where the twist comes in. When they're all like, all right, I'm ready to work in my group. I say, pick the thing you're the worst at, that's what you're doing. And after the panic subsides, I've got the seasoned JavaScript person who's like, I only want to solve every problem with JavaScript. It's like, you are now the graphic designer. You just have to focus on the user. You are not allowed to touch, like no functions. And somebody who's like a graphic designer, for example, will be like, look, you're thinking just about functionality. You are not worried about what color the button is. You just have to make sure it's accessible, or, think about the things you don't usually spend time thinking about. And my favorite, the SEO expert got to learn Git and was that may have been too far. But the thing to take away from this experience was that when people are allowed to take risks like this that aren't tied to whether they can pay rent or not, or they'll get fired or not, they embrace this challenge wholeheartedly, and they learn a lot. Every single person was like, oh my God, it was terrible, and it was wonderful, and I now have a million ideas of how to work with the people that I collaborate with in my day job, and people just got a lot better at this and felt a lot more comfortable thinking of themselves as multidisciplinary people, because remember, this binary thinking that is baked into the culture, like left brain, right brain, as we learned, is like a really weird thing to think about because we have two sides of our brain. It's very arbitrary. People can be multidisciplinary. And when they do that, and practice the flexibility of shifting their mindsets, shifting the way they think, jumping between disciplines, jumping between mental models, do learn above average, like in above average rates. And they're able to surpass those who reject mental models repeatedly. It's a constant lifelong flexibility that you can build up. So it's not like you'll ever put in enough hours doing the same thing. You know, that 10,000 hours to become an expert at something. The key word is of deliberate practice. And this is the deliberate practice. You can't just do the same thing. You have to spread your wings and like become better at a lot of different things. So here's my unicorn emoji. It's just like, we cannot keep calling people mythical creatures. They're so rare, the people who can do more than one thing, that they are mythical. They should be as common as horses. Let's do it. Which is really nice. Like, I just went all like, wow, you should do this and this. And you're like, look, here's what's happening at my job, though, right? You know this meme, right? I don't even know where the original source is. Like, that infamous gap, right? Somebody's like, look, step 1, draw some circles, and step 2 is the owl. Like, ship it. And that's like, I'm trying to get to the empathy moment here. It's like, this is how it can feel, right? Like, it doesn't feel good. And like, essentially, what we're looking at is this, right? That's the gap between design and development. You get design assets, and then you make a bunch of wild guesses, and you're like, code? Cool. And there's an unfair thing happening here that the person who is the best at the soft skills, as you would call them, gets stuck with being a manual like liaison between people, and when they leave, things fall apart because they were always a crutch. There was never a system built in to actually make sure that people communicated with each other. You just relied on somebody who's kind of good at people and probably didn't leave them alone enough to do the code on their own. That's not fair. But essentially, this is what ends up happening, right? Like, as a developer, who's ever felt like this? Like, you get some Sketch or Figma assets, and you're like, look, I am the artist here. I am the creative one who has to take your picture of a button and make the thing that actually exists in the real world. You're welcome. Right? And there's a little spite there, like a little, yeah, okay, thanks for your picture. I'm the architect. But meanwhile, as a former designer, let me tell you, that's how I feel when I'm a designer, like when I switch roles. I'm like, look, I gave you everything. I drew it, I diagrammed it, I have red lines, I have this, I have the guides, and like, come on, divs again? These are not divs. It's like circles. I should have been like, draw 2 squares, and that's an owl. You know, like, what happened? You're both just like, stop. And what's really happening is there's no interface between you, so you are just losing, you're bleeding information, right? Everything the designer has done, all the design thinking, questions, user research, just falls away because you're looking at this picture like, I'm a developer, and this is like, I'm not sure is this an H2? I don't. And meanwhile, you know, your designer is just like, you know, like, I gave you everything, and I'm looking at what's happening in the browser, and I'm just like, maybe I should learn to code, is like they keep telling me. But what you really have to do is focus on building an interface, and that's what designers and developers should kind of have between them. And if you write software, creating interfaces is like what you do, so that's great. You already have all the experience you need. Because nobody's wrong, right? Like, we're all making owls, we're doing our best, but we have to make sure we're actually communicating in a way that isn't relying on somebody's emotional labor to go around and like, are you feeling okay, designer? Do you feel heard? Like, how can we do it? Like, that doesn't scale. Your empathy doesn't scale. You gotta build a system. If something runs on your steam and falls apart the moment you've left, you've never actually built anything. And that is my hardest lesson as someone who is an art director in a nonprofit. It's doing fine now. So one of the best ways these days, like, we've heard the word design system a lot today. And yeah, like, this isn't the official diagram. This is a highly simplified, like, you should have one. Because there's no one way to do this. There are actually so many ways to do this. But the final point should be like, you should have some system for doing this. So let's take a look at what that could look like. So when I say that, though, I don't mean like just a style guide or something. Like, it's your how you collaborate and how you communicate. And again, I really can't stress this point enough. It's not like, oh, well, we have a really nice person with lots of soft skills who our communication's fine. It's like, no, like, what's your system? What did you build? What are your conventions? Where's your documentation? What are your patterns? Like, what are you doing? Like, how do you get this information from one domain into the brain of somebody else in a different domain with different concerns and different things that they're supposed to be thinking about? Well, like one tool we have that's like now industry is like a style guide. Here's a one that I helped with. Looks just like every one of them. You know, it took the logo off and you're like, I know that one. It's like, you don't, it's an internal one. But it's just like one tool. Why is it common? Because it immediately shared vocabulary, and like if a designer doesn't know how to code, they can look at this and say like, here's what we have available. That means when I design something new, do I create something new? Do I edit something we already have, et cetera? And it creates, this is one interface for you to have a conversation about what are we building? What have we already built? What do we have built that doesn't look so right here? But there have been plenty of talks about these, so that's not what I'm talking about. This is my favorite thing. Very unreadable when on a giant screen. But scaffolding, that's a very, very common way of like that teaching really is making it easier for people to contribute. And so this is something that happened when I was working with a designer phenomenal designer, amazing UX thinker, pretty darn good at HTML and CSS, but did not put her skill points into JavaScript. And when it was time for her to work in this totally state-of-the-art, awesome React application, it was kind of like, you need this much JavaScript to enter, and she was just like, right here, right? Like, she just couldn't do it. And, you know, what started happening was she got pushed back into Figma. And, you know, like, or Sketch, one of those, like, just here's a picture of what we should do. Even though she knew how to use Git, she knew how to do awesome accessible markup and CSS, but that gap started widening. And meanwhile, the JavaScript developer had to do all of the markup and styles all of a sudden because it was like, you can't, look, you don't know all the abstractions in this code. We got so much stuff going on. Like, and both of them were really unhappy. And so I was like, what we need is some scaffolding. And this is one of the easiest things you can do. Set up like a little prototyping page, feature flag it, make it only available on dev or staging or something, like hide it away somewhere or make it public, whatever. I mean, nobody's ever going to just randomly go to random URLs on your site, maybe. But like have a place where you have like a static like bit of data that if you're in a React application, for example, the designer can start coding in vanilla HTML and a little bit of CSS or Sass and have all of the variables and like utilities, mixins, whatever you have available. And they can write vanilla, the simplest looking HTML that then your more seasoned person who's like, look, I know the ins and outs of like connecting into like the Redux store and make, you know, all the React, as Brad would say, all the React stuff. And they can take that code and then just finish it out and you know, abstract it into the thing, map over stuff, whatever. Do the things that your designer might not know how to do. And what that does, this is not like you're doing these things twice or you're making people do this. It's just like your developer never has to guess which level heading it is and mess that up. And your designer doesn't have to pause their entire career to learn enough JavaScript to be able to contribute, because what's happening right now is like it's getting harder to contribute and the gap is widening because the field is widening. It's not anybody's fault, but it is our problem. So creating a place where it's just like, here is where you write your pretty much HTML, and here's where you write your styles, just like write it here and I'll put it where it needs to go, is a really easy way to enable somebody to do this work. Now, the benefit is the developer abstracting it gets a lot better. Like, wow, a section? Main? What are these? It's like semantic HTML. Enjoy. No more divs. As well as the designer can become more broad with their skills so that they're not just constantly just pushed away to giving you like representations of what it is. And the cool thing is the code that you write is immediately able to be incorporated into your style guide and be testable because you used fake data and it's right there. Set up some visual regression testing, go, you know, all out with it. But realize like it becomes this easy thing to collaborate with. Now here's a totally useless thing I made. Just to give you an idea of like, it doesn't have to be like all these really super useful things. Sometimes just the exercise of, well, I really hope that stops being so pixelated. Let's go Wi-Fi. So some of the most, even the most useless exercises can be team building activities. So here is something, a little thing from work where one of my designers, I looked at how she worked in Figma. And I was like, okay, she designed this thing. Oh, nope, that's not my slide yet. It decided to skip. No, I saw this. Play this. All right, play. All right, now you saw what I did. So here's her in Figma, and here's my tiny little clicks here. And I was like, oh, she has a grid, little squares to look at so she can line things up vertically for vertical rhythm. They're still using like these little column grid to make sure things are aligned. I'm like, okay, if this helps you. And then like, look at all these things, like there's little boxes and stuff. You get things that like, you're like, that's part of this, that's part of that, that's cool. That's your workflow. Neat. What can I do? I see this, that's cool. So I built this. So at the New York Times, we have like a maker week where we can just take a week to build something. So like technically on company time, but during a enjoy your creativity and learning. So I built this. So this is just a little component, and I mean little, it's literally, you can just like drop it into any application. So this is what I did. I was like, here's the live version. So I made this little ribbon that appears only on Devon Staging that pulls down a moleskin where I can say like 1 up, 2 up, 3 up. And guess what? Our homepage is a 20 column grid. So I had the 20 up there. Made it so they can customize the colors because that's how you win designers over. Like you can see the alignment, you can check it out. Things are lined up. I did not mess up. And then you can have that like, check that out. Thanks, Leah. This is the background. Just like, hey, you can just kind of have a little ruler so you don't have to take a screenshot, put it in Figma, and then use a guide, like make it simpler. And then like, hey, check it out. This highlights, if I hover, it highlights everything this is nested in. Just to kind of see like when you're like, are you saying nudge up or down? Or like, let's take a look what boxes I'm working with, just so we can have the same language. And it's pink and fun and frivolous because what I really was wanting to communicate was this, was like, I see you, I hear you, I see what your workflow is, and if there's anything I can do to make it better, even if just through this we like just have the conversation about what's important to you, how can we get it in the browser more quickly, how can I enable you to more effectively work in the browser, and just like, it's a great time. And is it super useful? Probably. It's definitely fun. But what it did was it made us communicate more clearly about how, for example, how she was thinking about like vertical rhythm. Like when she was aligning that text, it is like very intentional. When they're thinking about typography, like when they're thinking about like the grid things, like the thirds, they're still thinking in like ratios. So, golden ratio, all the design cool stuff. And just make something, You don't have to just like learn to code. You don't have to tell people to be one shape at your work just so that they stop annoying you with their whatever. Like just build bridges, build tools. That's what software is like build the things for the humans because it makes things a lot better. And like really, like, y'all, we gotta stop calling people unicorns when they can do 2 things. Being multidisciplinary is your natural state. People telling you that you cannot be a designer because you're already an engineer is weird. And it's wrong because it's just like literally science. You tend to be able to be flexible and be, unless you reject mental models constantly, you can do it. But if you do spend your career rejecting different ways of thinking, you will feel left behind. You will feel like the industry changed around you and you don't know what happened, and grumpy think pieces on your own personal blog that you haven't updated since 1992. So, it sounds like I'm being like, okay, look, build a place for people to contribute. Be positive about it. Don't tweet that it's broken the second you think that you feel feelings about learning something new. But what I really want to do is really highlight the incredible work that is happening in this community because it's so easy to see somebody on Twitter ranting about stuff and just be like, they're so wrong. That's not where I'd like to spend my energy. Where I really like to spend my energy is thinking and talking about and highlighting and collaborating with the people who are doing the work to make this industry better, to enable people. So, while there's people arguing like Vue versus React or CSS or Emotion or CSS and JS, CSS modules, whatever, like I tried all of them, different, have different things that they've got going on. What I really like to think about is people. Like, instead of thinking about the technologies your team uses, think about what skills your teammates have and how to make sure they are able to contribute in their best way possible. So just like that previous example, if that means like setting up a little vanilla HTML and CSS place where your designer can get their mock-ups into a real prototype, great. That's not that time-consuming to do, but it makes an incredible impact, both in the, as we learned earlier, raising the design literacy of your entire team, including perhaps the weakest member, but also creating a much more psychologically safe culture where you are allowed to expand and be multidisciplinary and make kind of these silos go away. So as you are now converted to doing the work to enable people, let's take a look at some of the ways this is happening that we may not have actually noticed because it's just how things are. Like shared vocabulary-wise, Sketch, for example, has a code export, right? We're not copy and pasting from Sketch, hopefully, like directly for the website. But why is that there? That's so when we're talking about that little roundy button thing, border radius. Or one time I had to like talk to a designer and be like, what do you mean when you say tap over state? Hover. We can build a shared vocabulary so that when it's time to transfer a design that has a lot of design thinking behind it into code, like we got it. We know exactly which declarations to pick. We also, React could be this. This is from their introducing JSX docs. Const element equals React create element h1 class name greeting. It has a string. Hello world. It could look like this, and there are plenty of folks who would look at that and be like, what is wrong with that? That is ideal. In fact, let's ship it. But instead, it's very intentionally this. That is something someone who knows HTML can immediately contribute to. And I think my personal guess why React has been so kind of like sweeping the nation in the world is because aside from the fact that you have to camel case all your data attributes and you can't use class, which is like, that's a big one, it transfers the mental model of HTML into it. So if everyone's like, React's not accessible, it's like, because you put only divs in it and you wrote it wrong. Like you can make it pretty darn accessible. Earlier they also had like, well, you put too many divs in there, and the React community responded and said, okay, now it's a fragment, it's not a div. They're listening and they're trying to collaborate so that the people who know this stuff are able to contribute equally. Let's talk about the Firefox Grid Inspector tool. Jen Simmons worked with some browser developers, and not only is that her awesome website, probably a really, really old screenshot at this point, but we were all able to learn CSS Grid much more easily because of her work. We can visualize what it's doing. So we're not just looking like grid something this. We can see the grid tracks and the grid lines and the numbers and everything. And that's an incredibly powerful tool that has enabled the world. And that's incredible to me. And it could be like tutorials and visualization of all sizes. This is a code pen I love to highlight. This is by Potch. It's just a code pen. And it's making kind of that joke on that CSS is awesome mug, which, you look at it and it kind of goes back and forth like CSS is awesome. And then look at the ways it can overflow. It is awesome. Feature, not a bug. But that's just making that and putting it out there is just teaching a little bit more of a mental model to people. And then this is directly from Glenn Mattern's CSS modules team. It's not like, we hated CSS so much and the cascade was awful, so we destroyed it and made some CSS. It's like, no, they firmly defend the virtues of CSS, but they made something that works for them and their use cases. And having used CSS modules myself, I get it. There are specific times when that is a very good solution for your team because my definition of should we use this or not is, does this enable the people on my team right now to contribute in their best way? Am I able to set up a system where I'm not a gatekeeper essentially saying, well, we have to do it my way, or sorry, you can't contribute. And then there's like this thing, which is, just all right. Sorry, Brad is sitting right here. Making docs easier, like building the tools to make things easier for people. It's a lot. And there's workshops and training from lovely folks we heard from earlier in this conference. And of course, community building. These events don't run themselves. And the organizers, the volunteers, and all the speakers that we get to learn from are doing an incredible amount of work to introduce positivity, to teach people not just we didn't just run through a bunch of declarations, tricks, and hacks. We're talking about mental models, ways of thinking about this, ways of learning this, ways of teaching this, and empowering the people on our teams. That's way more powerful than, saying, I'm uncomfortable, so I'm never going to learn this ever. So if there's really anything to take away from this, you are the people who have to build the tools. You are the teachers. If you're at all senior, you have to empower people to be able to contribute in their best way, because you don't get good products from people who are all the same. And if your systems and structures are pushing everybody into the same funnel of being good at only JavaScript, or the same funnel of let's not worry about the cascade or something, you're just not gonna be as good as other companies who do take it as a priority, who do take design seriously, who do create teams that are truly multidisciplinary and are able to not lose giant amounts of information between each other when they collaborate and communicate. So hire people who are good at different things. As a career switcher in tech, I'm very grateful for the people who said hey, you used to be a teacher and now you were teaching design and painting and art, and yeah, here's some code, write it. That was great. It worked out nicely for everyone. Enable them to contribute their best way. Don't just throw them into something and say you better do it just like me. And for yourselves, embrace the cognitive dissonance. The more uncomfortable you are, the better you're gonna learn. There's just that perfect line. I mean, if you shift into panic, ease up a bit, I guess. But if you embrace the cognitive dissonance, you will have above average learning, and you will not feel left behind by an industry that feels like it can be moving too quickly. Because anybody here who learned React first and is yeah, I'm always going to be super comfortable with this, or anybody who's the industry's not going to change around me, this technology we're working with, that's here to stay. That's not going to happen. So you need to practice the flexibility now and different ways of thinking, and CSS is an amazing way to do that, whether you're a designer wanting to get some more breadth and kind of dip your toes into the code. If you're a seasoned developer who wants to kind of think more declaratively and to just shift things around, it's going to make you a lot better at what you do right now and a lot better at communicating. And so what that's going to mean is you make a positive impact. You make this community better, and you get to be a voice against the very loud complainers and naysayers, because it's so easy to be the loud, complainy person, but it's very, very hard to push through the cognitive dissonance, to learn something, to stretch and challenge yourself, especially if you've already experienced the thrill of being pretty good at something. So that is my talk. I hope you all go forth and build better tools for collaboration, or at the very least, please help your teammates code or design or have some way of communicating, whether you start with a style guide or some kind of playground prototyping space in your application. Give people the place to take risks, to get things wrong, and to not feel like they have to qualify to be a mythical creature, to just be able to do two things instead of one. So thank you so much. Awesome. Oh, I'm gonna unplug that for them.
Very good.
All right.
All right. Before we get started with the audience questions, I have one. I love that font you were using. The F ligatures were very interesting. What is it?
That is a Google font. I think it's called Patrick Hand or something. I used to hand draw my slides Lara, he's I know how much work that is. So I picked the closest one to handwriting looking.
All right, very cool. Thank you. So I have a question, kind of a little bit open-ended here. We've talked a lot about leaning into your cognitive dissonance. It's an important learning tool here. Mm-hmm. What do you think about the idea of having teams do a day of working on whatever they're worst at?
That's basically what I prescribe every time. So like we have a maker day and then a maker week at work. And a lot of that is just like stretch yourself somewhere else, do something else, work with another team, work somewhere else. And that's an incredibly effective way to work. There are a lot of stakes when you have to do something for a job. They're tracking your velocity. They're actually, if you look up creativity killers in a lot of educational books, that you basically find a startup. Like all the things like surveillance, Jira, tracking how fast you're doing things, constantly like checking in on, like those kill creativity, those kill risk taking, those kill your ability to withstand the intentional discomfort that it takes to learn something new. So yeah, if you are in a position of authority, make it easier for people to take those risks in a controlled environment where you don't blow a deadline, but like carve that time out. It's important.
Cool. Another little interesting question about some of the things you said about, don't call people unicorns just for being able to do two things. But on the other hand, we often see in hiring things, especially in the UI world and whatnot, those positions are often seem to be hiring for multiple positions at once.
Yes.
They just kind of want to hire one person instead of several, so they jam them all together. What about that?
How many of you have left a job and two people had to be hired in your wake? Oh yeah, the CSS working group right here is like, okay. So, but I think a lot of what's happening in the industry that's also pretty apparent is people get hired at mid or junior level. They level up at work. And then that's the position that gets hired for. And we're kind of inflating what those are. And suddenly, like, you don't, even if you qualify for 90% of it, you're like, oh, sorry, not enough. You need to also be, I get stuff from recruiters like, we need a designer who is also awesome at managing databases and like, also Java, also .NET. And I was like, wow, that's a unicorn that left their company for real. That's reserved. But it's, I think one of those, like, we have to shift the thinking, just like we have to shift the thinking about CSS and stop calling it tricks and things. Like, there's a mental model, there's an intention. It's been designed intentionally this way. Just because you don't understand it doesn't mean it's not there. And it's the same idea of, like, if we start talking about people as more multidisciplinary, if we're allowing ourselves to, like, maybe the industry will catch up and reflect that. That being said, whatever you have to learn for your job, I mean, there's a really cold, hard reality on that. And it's just like, no matter, I mean, like, I'm a software engineer who doesn't get to do design anymore because I was like, oh, fine, let's see how much I have to learn to code. And it's like, oh, all the way. And it's never enough for somebody telling you need to be, whatever the gatekeeper, you're never going to be enough. You're never going to know enough JavaScript. You're never going to know enough CSS. You're never going to be a designer enough. And that's why part of this too is like, oh, that's my daughter. That's great. Oh, little junior developer. You're never going to know. She can choose her own path. But like, you're never going to be enough for the people who are criticizing you. And that's why I'm saying, like, forget it. Forget all the Twitter rants and everything. Focus on the people. Like, build the community you wish to inhabit. Build the tools you wish you had when you were starting out. Build the collaborative, design interfaces, people interfaces, because that's the only way we're going to get through.
Thank you very much, Natalya.
I know, it was a bummer of a talk. Awesome, thank you so much.
All right, thank you.